6 years ago, I stood on a stage, not so different to this one, to co-host our first ever TEDx. That's me right there. Now, of course, a lot has changed since then. I mean, I now understand quantum mechanics and I've lost my vastly superior bowl cut I had then. But yeah, and in this time, a lot has changed. And so when I was approached with this opportunity, it made me think back to that time and think about how isn't it amazing how dynamic our personalities actually are? How our identities evolve so drastically as we age, as we meet new people, as we encounter new experiences. For me personally, the catalysts to change have always been conversations, especially, in fact, when they're controversial. When I think back to my high school, I mean, these last few years, the highlight of high school for me has been having such conversations with my friends late into the night. So today, me and my bare bones PPT would like to share with you a glimpse of two such conversations that I had. Conversations that made me think about what it really means to be a citizen in this dynamic world where these powerful constructs around us are continuously creating and destroying walls of limitations. Okay, conversation number one, AI. I was going to ask how many people here have heard of ChatGPT, but I don't think I need to. I mean, that amazing software has helped me with so much homework. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Maybe. Anyways, so the company that created ChatGPT also made another deep learning software called DALI. How many people have heard of it? Okay, okay. So for those who haven't, DALI essentially creates an image based on a prompt you enter. So for example, I entered the prompt 12th grade student speaking on stage at a TEDxYouth event, and within 15 seconds, this is the output it gave me. I mean, that image there, if you just put some wooden blocks in front of me, I think that's pretty accurate. So, but what's more fascinating about this is that this image that Dali created, it simply doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, no one's ever photographed it, no one's drawn it, no one's created it, doesn't exist on the internet. Dali produced it right then and there. The thing about DALI, and in fact all deep learning AI, is it's trained on a model that's based on how our brains work. It's called an artificial neural network, in which DALI is presented with training data and it learns to recognize patterns just the way we humans learn. So, for example, DALI was given 3 billion images and their corresponding captions. For example, it could be given these images for a 12th grade student, or perhaps those, they're not very clear here, but those images for a TEDxYouth event stage. What it did was it identified the patterns, the commonalities in these images. So for the TEDxYouth event stage, perhaps it saw the TEDx logo, as is over here, or a projector screen in the background, and it thought that these, in a sense, it thought that these are the features that define a TEDxYouth event stage, that make it distinct from an image of anything else, like, say, a basketball. And the same for a 12th grade student. I mean, it saw hair, it saw eyes, it saw clothes, and it saw that face that says that I'm procrastinating very hard right now. Now, by repeating this process over millions and millions of images, in a sense, it learned how to visually represent these different concepts based on observation. So when I asked it to produce an image for a 12th grade student speaking at a TEDxYouth event, it didn't just paste images of one onto the other. Rather, it created a new image by amalgamating its knowledge of what things represent as 12th grade students and what things represent a stage. But here's where this conversation really gets interesting for me. If I ask you right now, do you think Dali is creative? What would you say? Do you think, based on everything I've told you, that Dali has crossed that wall of creative limitation that at least I thought technology could never surpass? If you ask me, I'd say yes. Because ultimately, even we humans, we produce artwork based on inspiration from all of the other artwork we've ever seen, all of our own memories, all of our own experiences. I mean, isn't human imagination just an amalgamation of all that we know? For Dali, I admit this knowledge is limited to 3 billion images and captions, but still, it's able to randomly amalgamate these concepts that it's learned. I mean, you can see it over here because I gave the DALI the same prompt again and it came out with 3 completely different images. And you can see how it's understanding concepts here because look at the image in the bottom right. There's the red dot, right? TEDx is the classic red dot that's usually put on the stage. DALI's picked that up and somehow it's thought that it goes on the wall instead behind the speaker. But it's understood that concept. It's picked it up, it's put it behind the person on the background. I mean, if that isn't creativity and this randomness isn't creativity, then what is? It's like Mama always said, Dali is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. But anyways, no matter the conversation, we always come to the conclusion that despite this, Dali is far from sentient. It may be creative, but it's not human. The biggest ethical issue with AI is known as garbage in, garbage out. Because AI doesn't have an ethical conscience of its own, any biases in the data that it's given are propagated to its output. For example, if you search up CEO on Google, you'll find way more images of old white men than any other age group or gender. And since DALI is trained on these very images, these biases are propagated. So when I entered CEO as the prompt, this is the output I got. Now, I don't know why that image in the bottom right is so scary, but you can see that because unlike us humans, we know that CEO is not an appearance, it's a position. DALI doesn't know that. Because DALI saw the internet as its database, it saw that most CEOs have white skin, they have gray hair, they have, say, wrinkles on their face. It thought that perhaps these are the features that define a CEO. And we know that that's not the case. I mean, especially in our modern world, even the CEOs of Western MNCs look more like this, and this. AI lacks an ethical conscience to, say, represent diversity in its output, and hence fortifies existing walls and stereotypes. And the repercussions of this are far beyond just artwork. For example, in 2020, the Detroit police arrested a black man based on a facial recognition AI identifying him in the surveillance video from a store. He was arrested, but sometime later, studies, according to MIT, proved that the training data used to create that model, the facial recognition model, consisted of around 80% white faces, whereas the population of Detroit is actually more than 80% African American. And thus, the model had a very high error rate when it came, relatively very high error rate, when it came to differentiating between different black faces. And thus, it led to the wrongful arrest of a black man. But this issue of garbage in, garbage out is not inherent. I mean to say that we can fix it. If we ensure that the data sets we feed AI are representative of the entire population and its diversity, we can get rid of this issue. Ultimately, what I learned from such conversations is that while AI may have overcome the creative limitations of technology, it's our responsibility to ensure that it doesn't fortify the social limitations and walls that we have created. But when I think about stereotypes and these social norms that exist around us, there's one particular conversation that I would like to share with you. It's my conversations about gender. Because ultimately, gender is also a set of social norms or archetypes that we assign to different types of people, different genders. However, I only truly understood what gender means when I talked about it in the context of these 4 terms. And a thali. Allow me to explain. First, biological sex. This is what we're assigned when we're born. It's based on our physical characteristics like our genitalia and our chromosomes, like whether we have XX or XY chromosomes for males and females, or perhaps even XXY or XYY chromosomes for intersex people. For a thali, sex is sort of like the plate itself. the foundation, the physical foundation upon which all the food comes, the identity builds. It's sort of the physical and genetic basis of our identity. Then comes sexuality or sexual orientation. It refers to our sexual, romantic, and emotional attraction towards other people. For example, homosexuality, meaning attraction to people of the same gender. In a thali, I think of this as the achar. It adds the spice and the tangy flavor to our life. And this brings me to the all interesting gender, split into gender expression and gender identity. Gender identity is the set of social norms or archetypes that we personally identify with. For example, one can identify as a man or a woman, a girl or a boy, or say non binary, in which case one doesn't fully identify with either the archetypes for men or women. Gender expression, sorry, in a thali, I imagine this as the rice. It doesn't really add to the appearance of the thali, but it's the basic structural component that comes with every bite you take. And just that way, it's the sort of part of our identity that gives it structure and purpose. After all, psychologists have proved that men and women do have fundamentally different brains. Their brain structures are different. And so, in a sense, our gender identity does influence each and every decision we make, each and every bite we take. On the other hand, gender expression, that's sort of like the sabzi, the curry. It's what gives the thali its color, its outwards personality, its appearance. And in a similar way, a person's gender expression refers to how they express themselves through, say, masculine, feminine, or androgynous behaviors or appearances. Okay, let's try this out. How many of you think that these are images of women? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, actually, in the bottom left, that's an image of me with long or perhaps longer hair. And in fact, two of these images are also created with DALI. Try and spot them. But the point here is the real question is not whether you can identify whether these are women or not. The real question is it even right to ask this question or to answer this question? Is it right to identify or to assume someone's gender identity based on their expression, say through their hair or their interests or their clothing? In fact, when I had long hair, every time I'd enter an Uber, I used to be called Didi or Madam, until that is, they heard my naturally very deep voice. But ultimately, like I said, gender is a social construct. It's based on typical norms or appearances. So, because long hair is typically a feminine trait, perhaps one can say that these images represent a feminine gender expression. But just the way, based on seeing the curry or the sabzi in a thali, you can't say which type of rice is there, basmati or jasmine or whatever. You cannot assume someone's gender identity, whether they're a man or a woman or non-binary, etc., based on their gender expression, feminine, masculine, etc. But here's once again where the conversation really fascinates me. Is gender a useful construct or not? Is it creating more walls than it's destroying? Gender identity used to be marked with a simple binary checkbox. In India, for example, until 2014, the government only recognized a man and a woman in all government documents. After that, however, it was recognized that gender is actually a spectrum, and so another box was added for other. Forgive my drawing, it's very, very hard to write with a trackpad. But gender identity is a spectrum. The same concept of gender evolved from being a limiting wall, a binary, to a continuous spectrum that was inclusive. So, for example, someone can identify as a demi-girl with mostly girly characteristics or a demi-boy with mostly boyish characteristics. But is the nature of gender itself limiting because it allows for the creation of such manly or boyish characteristics? Should we instead have a genderless society where everyone simply identifies as a gender in order to prevent the discrimination and stereotyping that comes along with it? I'd say no. Because after debating this for hours, I realized that gender is still a useful construct. It gives us a sense of identity. For me, it's part of my identity to be a boy. That label of a boy, it makes me feel confident. It's part of who I am. And I mean, wherever there is diversity, almost always will follow discrimination. But that doesn't mean we should get rid of the diversity itself, right? We need to instead work on removing gender inequality and discrimination against genders. But gender diversity in itself is a beautiful concept. I mean, if there were no gender diversity, it would just be thalis upon thalis of plain white rice. From thalis to dalis, whether it be gender or AI, we're surrounded by constructs that have the power to and have created as well as destroyed walls of limitation. Walls around identity, around what it means to be human, what it means to be creative. And it's conversations about these constructs that truly help us become global citizens and informed citizens. So, if I could request you to do just one thing today, it would be that skip the small talk about the weather or about the terrible traffic or how you're feeling so bored talking about those things. Instead, ask questions you've always wondered about. Try and discuss them. Because while I'm no longer quaking in my crocs, one thing I've retained is my childlike curiosity to always ask questions to start a conversation. And I can't imagine what else could be my biggest strength. Thank you.